Welcome back to Believers IAS Academy. In today's topic of the day discussion, we will be discussing a very interesting topic. And this time, we will be discussing something from the history, or most specifically from the art and culture point of the syllabus. And it is very unlikely or not so often that we get to discuss something from the current affairs part, mostly from the historic or let's say from the history point of view of the syllabus. So this video is dedicated to discuss about the Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple because of the recent visit by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself, right? So in this video, let's understand about the temple, the Chola architecture, the Chola dynasty in brief, and also we will try and understand about this temple and some of the important rulers of the Chola dynasty, right? And in the end, we will try and solve one prelims question, right? Let's begin. So why was this a news? As we discussed, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi ji, recently visited Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple, and this highlights the glory of the Chola art and architecture. And I hope it is very clear. You people know what Chola dynasty is, or who were the important, or what is the importance of Chola Empire in our history. So the Cholas were one of the most powerful South Indian dynasties who ruled the entire South India, not just the entire South India, but many of the parts, right? Many of the parts in the present Indo-Burma region, right? Their complete dynasty expanded to such a vast territory that we will discuss in this particular video, and they ruled between the 9th century and 13th century, making them one of the most powerful and the most expanded dynasties of the South Indian, right? So they were one of the most powerful South Indian dynasties. And talking about the timeline of some of the major kings, or also about the Chola Empire, it was initially, or let's say, established by Vijayalaya Chola, right? An emperor, Vijayalaya Chola, in the 9th century, 9th CE. He was the founder and he captured Thanjavur, and then he established, or that is the initiation of the Chola Empire, Chola dynasty. And going forward, later, another ruler, important ruler, Aditya I, he is claimed, or he is credited for expanding the entire Chola territory. And apart from these two important rulers, the next important ruler is Rajaraja Chola I, who ruled between 1985 to 1014 CE. So he is considered to be one of the greatest Chola emperor, one of the most popular Chola emperor, and he empired, or he expanded the empire across South India, Sri Lanka, and even parts of Maldives, right? And also he built the famous Brihadeeswarar Temple. In fact, Brihadeeswarar Temple is also considered as the masterpiece of the Dravidian architecture, or Dravidian style of temple building, right? So he was the one who built Brihadeeswarar Temple, and this was built in Thanjavur, and he is one of the most famous rulers from the Chola dynasty, Rajaraja Chola I. The dates are very important with respect to when he ruled, the timeline or the time period of these important rulers. So it is 985 CE to 1014 CE, right? So after this comes another important ruler, Rajendra Chola I, right, who is applauded, or who is mostly famous for his conquest in the Ganges region, and he is also called Gangaikonda, right? Gangaikonda, which also means that the conqueror or the emperor of the Ganges, right? And he was the one who also expanded, or who also established the maritime power of the Chola dynasty by proving his conquests, successful conquests in Southeast Asia, by defeating Sri Vijaya, one of the strongest ruler from the dynasties, in the Indonesian region back then, in the Indonesian region, right? So this was also an important time when this particular ruler, Rajendra Chola I, he also wanted to prove his legitimacy, yes, as a ruler, right? So another important feature about the Chola dynasty emperors is that in order to prove the legitimacy of their ruling, right, they mostly build temples, right? So if you can see, in the time of Rajaraja Chola, he built the Brihadeeswarar temple, and the Rajendra Chola I, between 1014 to 1044 CE, after the conquest of Southeast Asia, he founded or he built the Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple, and in fact, he founded the Gangaikonda Cholapuram city, and he named after, or let's say, he built a temple inside the city and named after the city itself. And this was to commemorate his conquest of the Ganges. And another important key thing to keep in mind is that the Chola emperors, in order to prove their legitimacy as a ruler, right, they used to build temples, and temples back then acted like a place of authority. It even acted like banks, right? It even acted like important places where all those important personalities stayed, resided. Powers started expanding from that particular place, and it was mostly seen as a sign of wealth, right? Wealth and administrative authority, right? So that is the importance of temples. And in fact, temple architecture went to its peak. In fact, the Dravidian style of architecture went to its peak during the era of Cholas, right? So also that is one of the main reason why we call the Brihadeeswarar temple as the masterpiece of Dravidian style of architecture. Then, after these two important rulers, the later rulers were Kolutunga Chola I, the Rajadhiraja Chola, etc. Of course, these two important rulers are very important to keep in mind. One is the Rajaraja Chola I and Rajendra Chola I. Very important. These two were the ones who took Chola dynasty to its extreme peaks, and these are the ones who even established, in fact, they used the army of the Chola Empire to expand itself, right? We will see a particular map, and we will try and understand the extent to which Chola dynasty was expanded. So this is the region, the gray one is the region which were completely ruled by the Chola Empire themselves, and the one that is marked in the pink, these are those regions which were actually subordinates to Chola dynasties, right? So this is the kind of the kind of spans, the kind of expanding that this particular empire saw because of these two important rulers, right? Now, talking about the Chola administration and its culture, the administration was very efficient, and it had very efficient bureaucracy, and it was both centralized and also it was participatory, right? This is one of the important feature of the Chola administration, that it was centralized because the ultimate power resided with the king, and also it was participatory in nature because it had local self governments, but it had local governments like village sabhas or grama sabhas, right? So the local self government, village assemblies, sabhas, you are. So this is another important dimension that maybe, if you have to talk about the importance of local self governments, you can probably quote this example from the Chola dynasty, that way back in the 9 to 13th or even 10th century, right? We, or let's say 11th century, we ourselves, indigenously had this local self government, and this is a testament to prove that local self government is something that really works well because of the kind of administration or the kind of stability that Chola Empire had. The complete credit goes for the administration, which was or let's say so personalized, I mean so centralized and also participatory in nature, and it was very efficient, right? Because of the local powers, or because of the power which was given to the local authorities as well in the form of village assemblies. And talking about the maritime trade, it was active. The maritime trade, in fact, it was considered to be one of the most wealthiest activity, which ensured that the territory or any empire, or which ensured Chola Empire made huge wealth. Wealth creation happened because of its maritime trade with some of the countries like the places like China, Southeast Asia, Arabia, and mostly they were trading with respect to spices, right? even in fact precious metals, textiles, right? So all these things were mostly in demand, and because they had a very strong hold, the foothold on the coastal regions, or let's say the coastal belt, or let's say the maritime belt of the India back then time. So it had a very strong hold, and this was one of the important revenue generation aspect of the Chola Empire, right? So Chola administration was very stable. One reason, main reason, is because of its efficiency that it had in terms of how bureaucracy was maintained, right? And next most important thing was the maritime trade, with which the financial, or let's say the fiscal part of the administration or the empire was maintained. And talking about the culture, they supported both Shaivism and also Vaishnavism, and they in fact wanted to kind of prove that, or let's say they wanted to kind of patronize both the sects as well, the Shaivism and the Vaishnavism. And also this was a time when literature shot up, literature in terms of many writings that came up, right, both in Tamil and even Sanskrit, right? So this is also one of the important thing or aspect about the Chola Empire. Talking about the Chola architecture, the key features, the style, mostly all the temples were of the Dravidian architecture. In fact, this is the time when Dravidian architecture perfected to some extent to finest. And then talking about some of the important features of the Chola Empire, or let's say the Chola temples, we have to talk about how this was different, right? Because the Dravidian architecture went to its peak, or saw a different diversion with the Cholan invention, we can call it. Because talking about the Vimanas, right? What are the different types of, I hope people know, or let's say students know, the different types of, or different ways the temples were built, right? So usually there was a Garbhagriha here, or we also call it Garbhagudi, right? And upon that there were a pyramid like structure, right? A pyramid like structure, which upon which had something called a shikara. And this pyramid like structure above the Garbhagriha is called as the Vimana, right? So the Vimanas, the towering above Garbhagriha, was made pyramid like. And even most of the temples that you see in the present days, right, especially in Tamil Nadu region, right, you can see huge pyramid like structures above the Garbhagriha, right? So that is one of the important features, that the Vimanas in this particular time period, especially during the Chola Empire, saw a towering like structure, like a pyramid structure above the Garbhagriha. Garbhagriha is where the deity is kept, right? And talking about the mandapas, so this is the mandapas that extends all the way from the Garbhagriha to the front entrance, right? So this Garbhagriha, this mandapas had large pillared halls, right? So another important special feature of these Cholan architecture, especially the temple style, was that the mandapas and the pillars that was there inside the mandapas, they were very large and had very good intricate carvings and paintings also. And talking about the gopuras, gopuras basically are the gateway towers. So gopuras are generally somewhere here outside the temple, or somewhere in the front of the temple, you can call it. So these are gopuras. So these gopuras or gateway towers became prominent later, right? So this is also one of the striking feature of the Dravidian architecture mastered by the Cholan Empire. And talking about the unique feature, they were the ones to use granite, and also they focused on precise engineering, and water tanks were also kept inside the temple complex, right? So this is one important feature. Now talking about the Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple itself, it was built by Rajendra Chola I, marking his victory or conquest in the Ganges. And that's what, after the Ganges expedition in the 11th century. And it is presently located in Tamil Nadu. And the temple was dedicated to Lord Shiva. And talking about its architecture, it is pretty much similar to the Brihadeeswarar temple, but more refined. And talking about the Vimana, it is slightly shorter but broader, graceful curve instead of steep rise. Of course, all these intricate details not required. Just have to keep in mind that the Vimana is present, and since it is the Cholan temple, right, built by a Chola Empire, So just have to keep in mind that it is purely from a Dravidian style, and a little bit about the Vimana, that it was shorter but broader and all of it. But all these intricate details like graceful curve instead of steep rise not required. Now talking about the sculptures, it had a few important figures, especially of Nataraja, Dakshinamurti, Lingodbhava, Vishnu, Durga. Right. So these were the important deities which were present in the form of sculptures. And also talking about the water tank, which usually they used to build within the temple, it was called as Chola Gangam, and this Chola Gangam water tank was filled with the Ganga water, which was brought by Rajendra after his conquest. So this is also another important key thing to remember. And talking about the significance of this particular temple, it is part of UNESCO's World Heritage Center site, and it is also considered as one of the greatest living Chola temples, right? So talking about the legacy of Cholas in the end, since we are giving so much time or discussing so much about the Chola Empire, talking about the legacy of the Cholas, it was a time when advanced, they were the ones who to create advanced temple architecture in the South India. They patronized Tamil literature, music, dance, and this was the time when India saw the spread of Indian culture across Southeast Asia, and it also inspired later dynasties like Pandyas and the Vijayanagara. Right. So this is pretty much the map of the Chola dynasty, which we discussed in the beginning. Of course, Chola Empire at its peak. This was when Chola Empire was almost at its peak under Rajendra Chola I. And talking about the key centers in the Cholan Empire, first was the Thanjavur, second was Gangaikonda Cholapuram, third is Kanchipuram. And talking about the overseas conquests, the conquest happened in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and even parts of the Sumatra, present Indonesia, right? So that's all about the Cholan Empire and whatever we had to discuss in this particular video. Even before we end this video, let's solve one prelims question. With reference to the Chola Empire, consider the following statements. Rajendra Chola I built the Gangaikonda Cholapuram Temple to commemorate his victory over the rulers of Ganges region. The temple is part of UNESCO's Great Living Chola Temples, along with Brihadeeswarar Temple and Airavateshwara Temple. The Cholas were the first in Indian history to have a full-fledged standing navy. Which of the following statements are correct? Please use the comment section, leave your answers below. I hope you have liked the video. For more such interesting contents, please subscribe to Believers IS YouTube channel. Signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Have a beautiful day.